It kind of helps to put myself on the stage now, doesn't it? All right, so that should mean we are caught. Let's see here. Audio should then be coming through just fine. Let me make sure that it is indeed playing properly. There we go. There we go. Okay, now I can hear it. Whoo! It's not going to be one of those times where there's just no audio. Hey, ZF Studios is here and ISO is here. Great to see you both in the chat. Hope that you are doing well. TV account, you didn't miss anything. You came literally right as we got started. So everything is all good. Hope you all are having a fantastic day, morning, evening, wherever you are at. And welcome to Spooky Month. You get the little organ to play. Because, yeah, with it being October, we are now in the month of Halloween. This is the beginning of my favorite time of the year because we got Halloween, we get Thanksgiving, we get Christmas, we get New Year's. Just a parade of all the best stuff as the days get shorter, things get cooler, and because I live in the desert, that is absolutely the best news. The summer is finally winding down to its end. Say we had one more hot day that was today, and then now, yeah, every day after this should just be a beautiful cakewalk through pleasant temperatures, maybe even some rain, and of course we gotta get ourselves ready for Halloween and trick-or-treating and just all the good stuff. And tomorrow I'm going to be working, hopefully, fingers crossed, this I'll be working with one of my sisters on trying out a special Halloween cake. So just great time. Hope you guys are also all having a great time as well coming into Spooky Month. All right, so basically for tonight, the one thing that I've really got planned to talk about is one of the things that was suggested a few weeks back for some Halloween topics, being the difference between Japanese horror and American horror. And I want to take this and not just simply, okay, so which one does which one is spookier? Everyone always does that. But I want us to, of course, have a look at it from the perspective of writers. What can we actually learn from this comparison and contrast between two very different ways of addressing horror? And I mean, this is kind of relevant to me right now as I am writing a choose your own horror adventure story that you can be a part of here on YouTube. Say I wanted to try doing it through Instagram rather than burdening our YouTube channel with it like I did last year. But the thing is that Instagram is not good for a long form story. So so I'm back here. Fabio, hello. I am no idea if I've thought of doing any actual horror. I do have an idea for a game with mascot horror-like ideas in it, but I'm unsure if it counts. Then again, Murder Drones counts as a horror just from certain moments and having seen it. Oh, Murder Drones is definitely a horror. Murder Drones is a Lovecraftian horror. Do not let the humor and the shipping trick you, because it is absolutely a scary story. It might not come across as very scary. There might only be a handful of scenes that are truly spooky to watch, but it is a horror story. And actually, I do intend to talk a little bit about Murder Drones down the line. So yeah, that's basically it. Looking at horror stories, I've got a bunch of stuff lined up about looking at some modern horror, talking about some older horror stories, so on and so forth. Excuse me. We can even get into reading some horror stories and the likes. So yeah, we'll just kind of see how we doth go. Is there anything that anyone would like to talk about though first before we dive into the lesson? Because once we dive in, we're locked in and we're going full throttle, spooky style. So let me know in the chat if there's anything that you wish to already talk, anything that you wish to talk about before we shift gears and get into the topic of Spooky Month. And of course, while waiting for that, I got the my captured footage from my time of playing against Jackenstein, which the first time that I played Deltarune Chapter 4, man, I really did not like this boss battle. Second time around, I'm like, this is actually really good fun. So, looking forward to playing through it again. Now then, I don't see anyone saying that they wish to talk about anything else other than our lesson for tonight. So, let's get into it. Let me shift us on over to our lesson. American horror versus Japanese horror and what we can learn from both. So, our goals for tonight are these. We want to first of all define the purpose of horror stories. Yes, and I know that sounds incredibly straightforward and kind of like someone's got to hit their chest and be like, duh, horror stories are meant to scare you. Yes. However, there's more to it. Horror is one of the most enduring of all genres. Even for instance, fantasy is not considered a genre that came around until the 1930s, 1940s. I personally disagree with this, but a lot of people who study literature, a lot of people who are neck deep, eyeballs deep in this stuff, will claim that no, fantasy is more of a creation from the 20th century. Before that, you've got fairy tales, you've got epics, and you have adventure. Adventure being the genre that kind of got shattered and split into sci-fi, steampunk, and fantasy. So horror as a quantifiable genre actually predates what we would consider science fiction, steampunk, fantasy, and even adventure. In terms of we can actually point and say, yes, this is a horror story. It fits all the definitions that you want, and this was written, people loved it, and there's a very, very long culture of telling horror stories. And what you'll find is that because that's the case, there's more of a purpose behind it than just simply, I want to get scared. That is why it's important for us to talk about the purpose of horror stories, because this should get you then thinking for your own horror stories. Why are you writing this? What kind of message are you trying to get across? Because if it's just for the jump scares and the gore, people aren't really going to take much to it. A horror story that sticks around is one that has something to say. Next thing that we want to do is we want to understand the fundamental differences between American and Japanese horror stories. And lastly, we want to utilize that knowledge so that way you can craft your own spooky tales. Yes! So, Fabio's continuing. Ghost children attached to the park that looks more like Pizzaplex. Sentient entertainment animatronics abandoned by the people there. Are we talking about Five Nights at Freddy's? Yeah, look, the Multiverse of Madness Wanda jump scare caught me, but there's various reasons why a bunch of movies aren't made just to fit a moment like that to scare you. All right. So, let us continue on. The big one. Why tell horror stories? Why bother with this? So, like all good legends and ancient tales, horror stories, which are truly ancient in their origins, are stories that have existed since way, way, way back when. And the reason why horror stories exist are to tell the audience about very specific things in their world and to warn them of what are at least the perceived realities, if not the very real, tangible realities of the world that they live in, and to impress upon the audience, this is why you do or don't do something, because there are horrible consequences otherwise. And over time, horror stories have evolved as well to become a commentary, speaking to the fears that otherwise people don't wish to voice, And especially in the West, in the cultural West, horror stories have become a way of poignantly, man, I could speak well, to dive down deep, to dig out, to dissect very real social ills and questions about the world. So this is what most people think of when they're like, okay, then we're going to talk about horror stories. Horror stories shouldn't just be there to scare you and be like, ah, you jump and you throw your popcorn everywhere, which can happen. I'll share a brief story here, real quick, of a time that I actually got to jump in a horror movie. But horror movies are also there to get people thinking about, you know what? There's this thing. It could be abusive families. It could be drug use. It could be reliance on the government. It could be the fear, the weird thing that everyone fears, that there might be something under the bed. Why is that? I mean, Monsters, Inc., which is ultimately a comedy. It is not, it has some moments of horror, but Monsters, Inc. is like, why does everyone fear what's under the bed or in the closet? What if there actually were monsters all over the world and they're part of this secret society that requires the power of screams? Again, way more fantasy and fun and comedy than horror, but you could very easily take that exact same premise and turn it into something absolutely terrifying, of monsters like, yes, we need your fear. And then you can have the adult being like, I don't fear anything. And the monster's like, you are exactly what we were looking for. As then the world just gets turned upside down and every single irrational fear you have gets justified. Crystal Dragon's here. Yay! One fun way to compare American and Japanese horror stories is to watch Japanese horror movies and compare them to the American versions to see the difference in values. Yeah, say you can easily, for instance, take The Grudge, or you can take The Ring, which are probably the most popular examples, and view them either side by side or one right after the other, and do a compare and contrast exercise to see what they did, how they did things differently, and not just simply their use of cinematography and of acting, but also, as you said, what kinds of values they decide to put into it. And that's going to be something very important once we start breaking down the major differences in general between Japanese and American horror stories. Now, because I did say I'd share with you guys a quick story. So my very first time watching, oh crud, I was just about to say The Conjuring. I'm like, wait a second, no, it wasn't The Conjuring. I saw The Conjuring years and years after this. Oh boy, why am I suddenly forgetting the name of this movie? Oh my gosh. Again, horrible with names. Let me quickly look this one up because this is a little bit embarrassing. Anyways, so I went to a movie night my sophomore year of college, and I say astral projects and gets kidnapped. There we are, Insidious. That's the name of the movie. So it was during my sophomore year of college. One of my best friends at the time invited me on over for a big howdy do. Everyone's getting together for a movie night, and we all came together, and it turns out it's like we're going to watch a horror movie. We're going to watch Insidious. So you got about 15, maybe like anywhere between 15, 16 people, with even more expected to show up watching Insidious. And if you haven't seen Insidious, it's absolutely worth watching. It's a good movie. And so as we're watching it, things begin to get really intense. We get to the point where they've tried to move out of the house to avoid all of the monsters and weird creepy shenanigans. And it turns out that all that creepy stuff has moved with them, and it's because their son, who's in a coma, is in a coma because there are demons trying to take over his body. And once they learn that, they have the specialist. The specialist is trying to get information about which demon exactly is after the kid. Because she says that there's one more powerful than the others. And so as this moment is happening, it's super intense. Lights are flashing. If you if you're not okay with that kind of stuff, you're going to definitely want to avoid that scene. But so everyone's just riveted to the screen. We're just like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Well, the people who were supposed to have shown up earlier came late. They texted the host, my friend, and they were all like, hey, we're here. And he's all like, wait just a moment. So these people who arrived late waited until we were just like all just enraptured with this moment. And then they started screaming and bashing on the windows of the house. And yeah, just about everyone in the house jumped feet off the ground, feet off the couch, and were just screaming. Food and drinks were flying everywhere. Everyone was freaking out. It was a fantastic moment. Probably never again to be repeated in my lifetime. The closest I've gotten to it was when watching the movie The Woman in Black. So it was again with a large group. I sat behind everyone in the movie theater. All my friends were in a long line. I sat behind one friend in particular who I knew was really jumpy. And at a certain point in the movie where you were expecting a jump scare, which didn't come, I grabbed her from behind by the shoulders. She squealed, took her purse to smack me, and ended up bashing in another girl's face with her purse. Gave me enough time to scuttle away and avoid the purse coming and hitting me in the head. All right. Oh, dang, I get it now. All of my horror stories convey helplessness, insurmountable obstacles, and inevitability. The nihilistic approach. Fabio, to modify a jailbroken Nintendo 3DS to see both versions of the movies at the same time in each screen. Now there's definitely an endeavor. I'll see you poster there. You saw the idea did take from FNAF, but also like the animatronics and Ghost Children are not directly the same thing. For example, they're connected in other ways within the story in my idea. Alrighty then. Okay, so here are some examples to help illustrate what I mean about horror stories having a deeper meaning. So, Metropolis, the good one, the one from the 1920s. This is a horror story that feels incredibly applicable to now, which is about how machines and automation are going to steal humanity. This is a horror story out of the 1920s, all about being replaced by machines. So this is a fear that people have had now for well over 100 years. It actually goes even beyond that to nearly 200 years ago, as industry really began to grow out of the innovations of the early to mid 1800s. Metropolis is kind of like that crowning achievement of horror of like, what if we were replaced by robots? And Metropolis is absolutely unnerving in a way that a lot of other similar horror stories just aren't. And I think it's because you get to see just how crushed and brought low humanity is by all of this technology. You get to see the difference between the haves and the have-nots, and how the haves are just so taken away with this idea of how automation and technology, machines can make them so rich, and they basically can live whatever lifestyle that they want. And when the main character gets taken out of that world and sees how everyone else is suffering, and he then sees from their perspective how humanity, even the rich people, are being replaced by automation and by robots who will now look and act human. He's just like, no. And of course, the love of his life is about to get transformed into a robot. And so it gets crazy. It's an old movie. It's technically a silent movie because the characters themselves don't speak. You just have the crazy music going over, and then you have little speaking cards. But it's still a very good, chilling movie. We then have Godzilla up in the upper right-hand corner, and Godzilla is a horror movie. We tend to think of it more these days as an action kaiju flick because kaiju have just kind of become that. Kaiju have ceased to be monstrosities that are meant to horrify you, and they instead kind of just become more like grandiose monsters to cheer on as either other monsters or humans fight against them. I want you to bear that in mind for later. I really want you to put a pin in that particular observation. But Godzilla, if you watch the original Godzilla movie, it is really spooky. It's genuinely scary. And especially as you realize that the Japanese were really trying to communicate through this film what it's like to go up against nuclear power, against just sheer destruction. And this movie was made not too long after World War II. The Japanese are still recovering in real time from the American firebombing, from 2 nukes getting dropped on them. And so Godzilla captures just all of that whole horrifying feeling and experience. And it's translated into something more fantastical, but still something very real that all of the viewers in Japan would be able to immediately identify with. Then, going on over to the bottom left, we have Alien. Now, Alien is a controversial one once you dive into one of its 2 main themes. Of course, the big one that a lot of people like to focus on is how the working class is exploited, because all of these effectively truckers in space are being served up as guinea pigs for a horrifying experiment, thanks to the company, which knows that what kind of evil they've brought on board. That was always the point. So there's that. Now, how the workers exploited, the workers expendable, but more personally, and this was actually something that was talked about by the film creators, was that they wanted to communicate a monster and an experience that would make men squirm as they thought about what it would be like to be sexually assaulted and impregnated. And in this case, by a foreign entity that you just cannot stop. You're powerless against it. And that is what Alien is meant to represent. It's meant to take these different ideas that should be applicable to, unfortunately, a lot of people and smash them together in a fantastic horror setting where the main characters cannot escape. They are stuck in space where no one can hear you scream, where you are all alone with this unstoppable monster that kills you and reproduces in just the most brutal, invasive way possible. Let's hear. I catch up with some of these guys have said. Taste. My mom didn't like the Murder Drones ending. While I feel it's a shame the creator may not make more seasons, she doesn't like stuff like Sin coming back to a bunch in the final fight. Various ways everyone acted by the end compared to the beginning, and the final realization as well. Yes. I mean, we talked about Murder Drones at length with its ending, and again, we all have our various opinions on it. Dorcas Daydreams. I saw part of Metropolis in my Western Civ class last semester. It was certainly an experience. LOL. Also, sorry for my absence. Stuff happened a few months ago. Hey, Dorcas, that's A-okay, and it's great to have you back. And awesome that you got to take a class that showed you at least some clips of this movie. I got to watch the whole movie in one of my classes. I kid you not, the professor taught that class solely so that way he would have an excuse to show his favorite horror movies to his students. And it was great. So megalophobia is real. I don't have it. I get the feeling in my gut when I see colossal entities that make me feel unnecessarily happy in a giddy kind of way. Interesting. Fabio, I wonder if Shadow of the Colossus would be a very, very insensitive game to give to someone with megalophobia. Maybe. Try it and find out. Now, my last example of a horror story trying to communicate a deeper theme, and this is one that definitely gets this story a lot of flack, is Dracula. Dracula was absolutely written to tell the audiences about the horrors and evils of having a really sexy immigrant come in and steal away your children or steal away your women. And yeah, so there you have it. That's Dracula, told at a time that a lot of people in England and in the United States were pretty xenophobic. So yeah, that is Dracula. That is why Dracula was written. Interestingly, though, the concept of vampires, and even of very powerful vampires, and of Count Dracula, of the real Vlad the Impaler, predates Bram Stoker's Dracula by hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years, at least in the case of just vampires in general. And so yeah, what Bram Stoker took and innovated was a long tradition, especially from Eastern Europe, of undead, blood-sucking, or soul-sucking monsters that would wear the faces of loved ones. And in this case, he's like, yes, but what if before your loved ones were taken over and turned into hungry monsters, there was a really sexy foreigner that would turn them into bloodsuckers? Perfect. Oh, I hate outsiders, is basically where we get it's basically where we get our understanding of Dracula. All right. Now then, with that in mind, thinking about what horror stories are, it's one of the most ancient of genres. Horror stories tell you about why the world is the way that it is, why you should fear that, why you should maybe obey the rules or stay away from certain places, so on and so forth. But they also act oftentimes these days as a critique of the modern world or various aspects of it. Bearing all of that in mind, let's now actually start talking about Japanese versus American horror stories. So, there's a wild debate about which country produces the scariest stories. Interestingly enough, if you ask most people in the United States, they'd say, oh yeah, the Japanese horror stories are way spookier than the American ones. But as I was preparing myself for this live stream and putting together this lesson, I actually found that there were channels and articles done by people over in Asia who were arguing that no, the American stories are actually scarier. So I think it actually kind of comes down to what you're not used to is usually the stuff that ends up scaring you even more. And in a way, horror constantly is being revived, even though people say, oh, horror is just tired and old and it can't do anything new. The moment that the moment that any horror book or movie or show does something that was unexpected, everyone's like, oh my gosh, I never saw that coming. Oh, I'm so scared. Typically, it's a knee-jerk reaction. It's overreacting, but it's real. What you're not expecting is usually what's going to scare you more. But in any case, as I said earlier, I think that the more instructive thing for us as writers is to have a look at actually what makes American horror stories in general different from your typical generic Japanese horror stories. And it's not just as simple as saying, well, one has more buckets of blood and the other one just has curses and nihilism. You could leave it right there, but honestly, that does not help us as authors all that much. Instead, we want to peel back the layers. We want to get specific. And while this will not be an exhaustive list of differences and similarities, what I'm hoping is that I can show you guys, generally speaking, what makes each country's take on horror unique and what we can actually take away from that. Something that might give us a little bit of inspiration and insight, especially if you want to write your own horror stories. Let me take a drink of water here. Good stuff. Keep yourselves hydrated, folks. Last time I thought that horror couldn't do anything new, we got the back rooms. Exactly. I always find it really silly when people say that horror can't do something new. And I'm like, no. If anything, the horror genre has taught us that it is probably one of the most adaptable genres of all time. Interestingly, sci-fi and fantasy should be way more adaptable. They should be cranking out new stuff all the time. Horror basically has this guillotine's blade hanging over it that you have to be innovative, otherwise people don't pay attention to you. And so the horror genre is always expanding, always growing, always inventing, always finding something new to do, even if it's just a small tweak here and there. And that's one of the things that helps horror to feel alive. And every now and then we get something very interesting and unique such as the subliminal space, not subliminal, the liminal spaces, i.e. the back rooms. Or you get something like Weapons. Honestly, Weapons is like the movie that just came out, Weapons, is based on actually really old ideas. It's just that the way that was presented was just creepy. Ooh. Fabio, some zombie VR game was in a nearby shopping center once as a spectacle, and a bunch of average people got scared of the PS2 quality zombies, apparently. Not that I knew till told, since brain was just shut. I do enjoy Backrooms and SCP Foundation stuff every now and again. All right, Fabio. Now then, American horror. Let's dive into this. One of the things that we need to consider when it comes to American horror stories is what America is. It's a melting pot of various cultures and the histories and the storytelling that they bring with them. And so as a result, America's horror story landscape, we can call it that, is not homogenous, as opposed to the way that the Japanese tell their horror stories. And so as a result, you will have really all different kinds of things happening in American horror stories. But there are some commonalities that you will find, such as any story that takes place usually in the West, so in the Western states, there's a good chance that you're going to end up diving into native culture, unknown, unexplored spaces full of ancient monsters and evils, or things that the Native Americans just don't touch because they're just so unknowable and so dangerous. There is also usually a very Christian element woven into a lot of American horror stories because America is a very Christian country. And there are also a lot of American horror stories that are all supposed to be reflections about what society is at that particular time. But some general things that you can expect to come across are, of course, typically lots of blood and jump scares. And as I brought up with the whole like native and unexplored spaces, you get the misuse of cultural monsters, i.e. the Wendigo. I don't know how many times people have used the Wendigo in a way that's not very Wendigo, or skinwalkers are just some of the most blatant examples. Or if an American horror story tries to utilize a monster from another country, they usually end up like taking the most basic and uninteresting version of it and just incorporating it into the US space. But then, of course, again, because America is very Christian, you also have loads of stories about demons, which then brings up how purity must save the day. So much so that in the first Scream movie, that was something that was brought up, that virgins and purity, like those two things are what save people until the soldier boy shows up. This is a trope that's kind of receded out of the limelight in terms of American horror, but it's still very present, where someone who has military experience, cop experience, or is trying to get into the force or into the military is usually going to be the one to kind of force their way through the situation and save the day. Usually they survive, or they're the last person to die. You have the wicked family monsters. Again, the whole pressure of you must be a good Christian. That's what's going to save you. And in order to kind of facilitate a lot of these setups, you get intentionally stupid characters, which is sad to see because it's way more scary when very intelligent characters are basically at the end of their rope. A great example of this is A Quiet Place. All the characters in A Quiet Place are skilled, they're smart, they have survived all this time because they know what they're doing. They are smart characters. And what makes A Quiet Place so scary, at least in the first movie, is that it doesn't matter if you're very smart. One mistake can kill you because all you need to do is just create just enough sound, and then those monsters know where you are and they just come at you. And you have no idea where they're at. And so there's just this ever-present danger. And so it's really interesting watching very smart and skilled characters go up against something that is obviously incredibly dangerous. Another good example of this is the Predator movie. You have very, very skilled American special ops guys who are up against a predator. And because they can't see it at first, they don't realize what they're getting themselves into. Sure, there's a little bit of intentional stupidity kind of to help set up the plot, but once the characters are actually in it, what's scary is that you have the best fighters, warriors, and hunters in the world being taken down one at a time in gruesome ways by this monstrosity that they have no idea how to stand up against. So yeah, when you have actually smart characters versus the horror, it really elevates the tension and the anxiety and the stakes. Intentional stupidity is a lazy way to write your horror stories. Excuse me. Let's see here. Let me catch up. So I'm looking forward to seeing more horror where everyday scenarios are horrified. Demon ducks, hippos with mandibles, bear mosquitoes. Hippos with mandibles sounds like one of the most horrifying things I could come across. Oh, that actually makes me a little bit sick to think about because I can picture it so fantastically in my mind's eye. Oh, no, thank you. A kid possessed all the nearby nature when it died in the forest. Somehow wasn't intended as a horror story of mine, but like that description. I said, okay, but native civilization, mythology, and culture is actually not to be underestimated. I study mythology, so it's amazing seeing parallels and similarities between them, perhaps an aspect of reality. And Fabio says, haven't watched many things, but I feel that sort of recently there's been some more of the soldier boy having experience, but still dying easy. Not sure where I saw that stuff. Well, it depends on the story that you're reading or watching. And definitely not all soldier boys that go into a horror story survive. For instance, Predator. But yeah, it's a classic of American horror stories. If you really want to see that trope overused, watch horror stories from the late 50s to early 60s. Soldier Boy always wins. Soldier Boy always somehow survives no matter what. And it gets really, really silly. Like watching Quetzalcoatl attacks. Oh, that's such a bad movie. It's so bad. It's so dumb. And the dumbest thing is that this god gets defeated by a Marine who just pulls out a six shooter and pops a god in the face and kills it, while everyone else riddles this thing with bullets and they can't take it down. And you're just like, really? None of that made any sense. Hippos have the personality to have mandibles. That they do. Hippos are horrifying. Hippos are scary. They're fun to look at from a distance, but no thanks. I don't want to get anywhere near a hippo. I'd rather be closer to a rhino than a hippo. But actually, I still kind of want to come back to your point right there about how ancient mythology and culture are not to be underestimated. Oh, absolutely not. 100% not, especially when it comes to spooky stuff. Like, you can have a whole lot of fun with what we know of older civilizations and cultures' horror stories. Because there is some good stuff. And honestly, some of the best American horror stories, which unfortunately don't get told enough of, are the ones that, again, tie into that more ancient history of where different cultures in the United States have collided hundreds of years ago and have brought with them their superstitions, their monsters, their rituals, and things have just kind of evolved from there. When I wrote my horror stories about this creature called the Conglomerate, that was in two different choose your own horror adventure stories. The Conglomerate is meant to be a beast that is born from the nightmares that people from different cultures have when they are put into a highly industrialized society. It is a creature that is born of their fears and takes on the shape of machines. And man, that was a fun thing to write. Anyways, Fabio, intentionally stupidity will always remind me of the scary movie scene of the lady reading the survive certain death signs and always going the wrong way. Yes, or like in Murder Drones, the one girl who's reading the survival book and still gets it wrong and gets killed. Okay, so last of all, let's wrap up the list right here. Simply learning the rituals. A lot of the movies and stories that dive into more ancient monsters or into demonology in American horror, it always comes down to the rituals. Know the rituals, complete the ritual, boom, you win. And then one thing, this is not directly in the horror stories, but if you've ever watched a successful American horror story, you then know this, that it's going to become a franchise and it's going to get milked for all it's worth. Why there are multiple Conjuring movies honestly makes no sense, especially if you dive into the real world notes of the couple. Like there are 3 instances that are actually like truly horrifying. All the rest are just kind of little weird things that happened that the franchise, because they needed another Conjuring movie, just blew way out of proportion. And how Insidious also just keeps going. Oh my. And just the Saw franchise just keeps going. Then the Scream movies just keep going. And the Friday the 13th movies keep going. And the Nightmare on Elm Street movies just keep going. It's just like, please stop. TV Account asks, what's the difference between psychological and regular horror? So TV Account, that's actually a good question. What I will say is this, when it comes down to, and actually, you know what? Let me switch on over to some footage while talking about this. So psychological horror versus regular horror. All horror is psychological to a point. However, the stories that want to like really bend your mind and make you wonder if what you saw was like, could you trust anything? What you just read, could you trust anything of what you just read or saw? A purely psychological horror is all about lying to you in the moment, making you question literally everything that is going on. And sometimes you know early on that you're being lied to, sometimes you don't. And again, the horror within a psychological horror story is all about just not knowing. And because you don't know the truth, you therefore are vulnerable. And so, yeah, that's a psychological horror in a nutshell. Again, all horror stories, in my experience, are psychological in nature, one way or the other. But it's just that the psychological horror specifically makes you question everything that you're going through. Let's see here. A good example of that would be The Thing. Even though The Thing definitely has a lot of jump scares and gore, and it's primarily perceived as a body horror story. The Thing is a movie that, as you watch it again and again, is meant to make you question if you even knew what was happening. Who is infected? Who was the person that started it all off? Like, what is the Thing even trying to do? You don't know. And ISO says right here, the fear of ignorance. Yes, that a psychological horror absolutely capitalizes on that feeling, that fear born of ignorance. And let's see here. Another good psychological horror is The Woman in Black. And that's actually one of my favorite horror movies. And one of the reasons why is because it gets in your head so fantastically well. The main ghost, she is hidden throughout the entire movie, literally everywhere. And the moment that you realize that she's there, you can't stop looking at her. But the thing is this, that the more you look at her, the more you begin to see her everywhere. And suddenly you start seeing her in places where she isn't. And it gets so much so that literally by the end of the movie, I remember when I first watched it and I came out of the movie theaters, I saw her at least 3 times driving home. It was frightening. And it's also one of the things that made Slender Man actually work so well as a horror figure, as a creepypasta, was that the idea of the Slender Man story was that you couldn't see him until you looked closely, and then suddenly you begin questioning where he is all the time. And the more that you question where Slender Man is, the more you think about him, the more you invite him into your life, which then gives him power over you. So, like, those are some examples of the psychological horror where it's all about either misdirecting you or getting you to think too much about the horrifying thing, about this monster or about this curse or what have you. Isa says, that's why my mythology story revolves around snakes. There are so many myths about evil snakes. So dang many. Liminality is psychological horror because even if there's no monster, you'll never understand anything. The fear of ignorance. Hey, and Stardrop Mellow's here. Hello, sorry I'm late. Well, don't worry, Stardrop Mellow. Great to have you here. And Darkest Daydreams. You're taking too long. Ah, yes. Yeah, I took way too long with this fight. As you guys can see, I'm just getting wrecked by all these little ghosts. All right. So that is my answer to UTV account. I hope that helps you make sense, generally speaking, of regular horror to psychological. All horror is psychological to a certain extent, but truly psychological horror stories are all about making you really think about things differently and getting you either to overthink or to question everything and to feel like you've been lied to the whole time. All right, so let me then return to our slideshow. Now, the question we have to ask ourselves is, so what? Why even bother? Like, honestly, why even bother breaking down what makes an American horror story or what the general tropes are or anything like that? Well, because American horror stories are in many ways set up to be fast and loose with the rules. While this can easily derail your monsters or your plot, because if you start bending the rules too much and there's no rules to a horror story, it's very, very hard for people to buy into it. Horror stories need to have rules because people need to make sense of why this thing is so scary. Because if it's just amorphous, if just anything can happen, then why should you actually be too scared about it? It's kind of like how people are more terrified to walk into a dark room and find the light than they are to walk out into a crazy storm. Even if there's like debris flying in that storm, you're going to find more people willing to walk out into a storm. Why? Because they understand it's chaos and there's a good chance that nothing bad's going to happen because you can see it. But when it comes to like walking into the dark, it's like, oh, what's going to happen? Now I know that almost seems kind of counterintuitive because the dark room is scarier than the storm. But the thing is that is that if you want someone to go forward, if you want someone to buy into something, you need to make sense of what they're getting themselves into. If you just tell someone go into the dark room, flip on the light, okay, but what's in the dark room? Anything could be in there. If anything could be in there, yeah, do I really want to go into the dark room? I might stub my toe, I might trip, I might walk into a monster. I don't want to go into this dark room. Hey, buddy, can you go out into the storm and check to see if my windows are rolled down my car? Oh, sure thing. Are you sure you really want to do that? There's right now hail. No problem, man, because I can see the car, I can see the hail. I know what I'm getting myself into. Weirdly enough, it's the same thing with a horror story. Unless people can understand what they're getting themselves into, people actually don't buy into a horror story. If the horror story makes no sense because it's being too loosey-goosey with its own rules or with the general expectations of what a horror story is, people check out. So you do need to understand the rules. And American horror stories end up relying too much on jump scares and the overusage of blood because they don't make a story that is able to stand on its own, using its own characters, its own rules, its own scenario. So that's something to kind of bear in mind. And that's why a lot of people say that horror stories from America are lame and focus too much on the gore, because it's not focusing too much on the characters and the setting and why the spooky stuff is even happening in the first place. But if you are able to hold true to your rules within your own story and some of the general rules of horror storytelling, then you can actually get away with a lot of fantastic innovations. I mean, just look here. I've got a little screenshot from the remake, and It by Stephen King. You've got so much stuff happening in this story. It is bizarre, it is over the top, it's wrong in so many ways, but people love it because it's a scary story that resonates with you and makes sense. Even the whole the whole ritual, again, rituals, a big thing about American Horror Stories. You gotta learn the rituals. Oh, if we know this ritual and we make Pennywise stick out its tongue, you then gotta bite onto the tongue, you gotta stare into its eyes, and you have to then do the ritual. Okay, you do that, and then things happen. Rules. It makes sense. Okay. Now then, when we compare that to Japanese horror stories, now this is something that I think not enough Americans actually understand when considering Japanese horror. And this is actually something that if you watch enough like anime, for instance, I know that anime is not the purest representation of Japan and Japanese culture. It is not, but it does give you some important insights. Most Japanese horror stories are rooted in concrete legends, either ancient legends or modern legends. That is something important to know. And those legends can either be nationwide, that people understand and people know them, or they could be very localized. If it's a localized legend, you're actually probably more screwed than if it's a nationwide horror story. There's a couple of other things to consider. That Japanese horror stories focus on two critical elements: karma and rules. Karma is something that everyone deals with. If you're a bad person, it doesn't even matter if you follow the rules, you're probably screwed. Even if you're a good person, you might be screwed, because if you break the rules, karma dictates that you must die or get horribly cursed or mangled. Something bad is going to happen and you cannot stop it. One of my best friends, she said her number one guide to surviving a horror story is this: find out if you're in an American or in a Japanese horror story. Because she said, if you're in a Japanese horror story, curl up into a ball on the ground and just wait for death to happen. It's going to happen. You cannot stop it. There is nothing you can do to save yourself. If you're an American horror story, okay, then start figuring out the rules. The moment you know what the rules are, there's a very good chance you're going to survive. So in a Japanese horror story, you need to know the rules. The problem with most Japanese horror stories, the way that they're set up, is that people don't know the rules until it's too late. But the curses, the monsters, the demons, the ghosts do not care what your situation is. You broke the rules, therefore you must pay. And that's one of the things that just makes the Japanese horror stories so awesome and so horrifying. So it feels inevitable because it sticks so stringently to that core concept. Now, there are horror stories. For instance, if you read Mysteries, Maidens, and Mysterious Disappearances, in that manga and in that anime, once you enter into a horror story, if you know what kind of legend you're dealing with, you figure out a way to circumvent that legend using ancient knowledge. And so for instance, the cultural relevance and knowing your rituals can save you. But that's a story that focuses more on the whole harem. Actually, I can't even say it focuses on the harem building aspect. It is an element of the story, but it's far more about how the people who cross paths with these legends end up being cursed for the rest of their lives. Nearly every single person in the cast of that story are all cursed in one way or another, and there's no going back from that curse. I can only think of one character who escapes without being cursed. And oddly enough, he's the one who ends up in a liminal space. He goes to a liminal space, ends up being hunted down by the old man of time, which is this conglomeration of different souls that try to rectify the imbalance between realities. And he manages to escape. And so he gets out of it without a curse, and just knowing that something good's going to happen in the future, because he actually meets his niece from the future inside the liminal space. Everyone else cursed to have their body, cursed to become water, cursed to become a living cow person, cursed to get yanked around by destiny. Literally, Destiny's like, "Hey, I need you to be somewhere," and then this person just gets literally yanked through walls, and has no power against it, and their body is not magically preserved against walls. So horrible stuff happens to her as a result. She gets mangled by destiny yanking her around. So, like, that's an example. So, like, right there, there's one of your happier examples of surviving a Japanese horror story. But in most cases, you don't. So what are some of the big things you can expect in a Japanese horror story? You can expect unrelenting monsters, because, again, if you're meeting up with a monster, you've broken the rules. So you're screwed. They're coming after you. One of the important things to also note about Japanese horror is that they acknowledge the fact that legends transform over time. And so the monsters or the demons or the ghosts do adapt to the situation, which also makes them feel even more inevitable because they never grow out. Let's hear, what's the best way of putting it? They never become irrelevant enough that they lose power and then can't do something. You will have guaranteed deaths because you don't have the horror story without someone breaking the rules. Monsters and demons cannot be stopped. And again, they are based largely in local legends, sometimes nationwide, but they are usually born out of what's happened locally. You do have a wide variety of monsters because in Japan, they have all different kinds of creatures and meet spirits and ghosts and ghouls. So you can have just almost about anything. And then, of course, there's the cultural relevance, and even the Japanese milk their horror franchises for all that they're worth. And this actually leads to, in stories like Mysteries, Maidens, and Mysterious Disappearances, they even bring up at one point later on in the manga, they're like, yeah, there are some beings that should be almost impossible to beat, but because everyone now knows them so well and the legend has changed, you're more likely, if you meet the woman with the slit mouth, you're more likely to end up making out with her than to have your face bitten off by her. Doesn't mean she's not scary. It just means that the outcome is going to be a little bit different. Also, you probably, if she does make out with you, you shouldn't break up with her because then she will rip off your face. Star Job Mel says this is literally Final Destination. Yeah, Final Destination. Death is unescapable. It will come for you. ISO, I should make a horror story about Alaska legends. The sleeping lady of Mount Sustina. Man, I know I've mispronounced that. Susitna. I'm going to say Susitna. The Tizuruk, the Kushtaka, the I'm going to mispronounce this absolutely. The Kalupalik. Sorry, ISO, I have butchered your legends. I don't know anything about those specific horror stories and legends, ISO, so yes, you should write them. Bring them to people like me who are ignorant, and that way I can learn and be horrified for the day that I eventually come and visit Alaska, and then I can be all like, I am going to get hunted down by something. Well, thank you, ISO. You won't hold it against me. Thank you so much. Now then, just like I asked with in regards to American horror stories, we should ask the same thing when we think about Japanese horror stories. So what? So what? Why should we care? Why should we break down Japanese horror stories and try to better understand them? Well, because, again, especially in the cultural West, Japanese horror stories are often considered by outsiders far scarier than the stuff that they have, especially, again, here in the West. And this is because most people are not used to a no-win situation in a spooky tale. Remember, when we look back at American horror stories, purity saves the day. Be a good Christian and things will happen. Like, things will just line up. Or you find the nearest Marine or cop or soldier who's a good guy, and Soldier Boy will win the day. No-win scenarios in American horror are almost unheard of. The movie, the original Night of the Living Dead shocked audiences because people expected that someone would survive at the end. And while though humanity does survive the zombie apocalypse, all of the main characters die. So people are like, wait a second, but no, someone should have survived. Someone should have survived that. We're just not used in the West to no-win scenarios, even in horror stories. But in Japan, you're screwed, because again, if you break the rules or if you got bad karma, you're done for. You're almost never going to survive. And so for the Japanese, the message that we need to consider always lies at the heart of all ancient horror. You must understand why things are the way that they are in order for you to get the warning. Don't go out late at night. Do not go into the weird, creepy tunnels. Do not go out into this forest. Why? Bad things are out there. People die all the time out there, whether to bandits, to poisonous fungi, to monsters, who knows? Better not to chance it. Don't go there. Oh, guess what? People died in that apartment. We don't know why. There's a very good chance that something awful happened there. Best thing to do is don't go there. Or if you are going to go there, make sure that you got it like blessed and purified and that you're looking out for things, because you don't want bad stuff to happen to you. And so it's a warning. Don't do dumb things. And if you're going to go to a place that seems dangerous, do everything in your power to protect yourself. Seems very reasonable. And the Japanese drive it home by saying, look, if you're not smart, if you're being stupid, you will die. No exceptions. Get the point? Now, one of the things that we have to consider about this is that this approach is undeniably terrifying. However, and this is a very important note, again, coming back to Godzilla and how Godzilla and kaiju have changed over time. If you're so rigid in things are this way, they must be this way, and especially with overexposure, you tend to actually rip away the fear that is in that legend or in that story. People aren't scared of Godzilla anymore. I mean, there are still some scary Godzilla stories out there, but most people aren't scared of Godzilla anymore. It's because Godzilla's just been done so much. And yes, he was done goofy later on. But even the original Godzilla movie, some people aren't scared just because they've been overexposed to Godzilla, or they don't appreciate the rules or the meaning behind it. And again, coming back to Mysteries, Maidens, and Mysterious Disappearances, there is this whole thing about, there's this whole conversation when they say some monsters and some curses have kind of lost their ability to really do major damage to people because people are no longer scared of them, because they're so used to them. And yes, that grants them power, that grants them life in the Japanese way of thinking about things, but it also removes their scariness because people no longer believe quite that much damage or horror or curses or death could come about from this thing or this place. And so if you're so rigid in a certain way, things then end up losing, again, their power, their scariness, which to draw actually on two different examples right here. If you look at the very first season of Dawn to Dawn, the first few episodes of Dawn to Dawn are actually pretty spooky and unnerving in their own right. It is a callback and a throwback to traditional Japanese horror. Turbo Granny being there in the creepy tunnel and Okrun getting cursed and losing his balls. Like it's something right out of a traditional horror story. The thing though is that because everyone knows about the creepy tunnel with the creepy monster in it, this has been made fun of now so many times because it's been so overdone. Everyone knows the rules. Everyone knows what the creature is. no one's actually really all that scared anymore, which is why Don-to-Don's like, we're going to have some fun. Rather than you dying or getting spirited away somewhere, you're just going to lose your junk. And so it goes on from there. And so suddenly the scary tunnel actually isn't all that scary anymore. Or something like with Higurashi. Higurashi is maybe one of the oldest, most over-milked Japanese horror stories. And it actually is legitimately spooky. It's a really good spooky story. But the thing is, this is that even itself knows that, even the creators of this know that they've gone on for just so long with it all, that it loses a lot of its scare, especially for people who have seen Higurashi in its different iterations, that they have to rely on an overabundance of gore and jump scares in order to get through. Now, Higurashi is amazing because it's able to still, after all this time, pull off its gore and its jump scares. But like once you know what the trick of Higurashi is, it loses a lot of its scare. And it definitely comes down to more of a character analysis, which is why people keep coming back to Higurashi, which I guess I should say exactly what this is, because if you're watching the anime footage right here and you've never seen it before, you're like, okay, well, what's going on? Higurashi takes place in a little tiny town up in the Japanese mountains where people keep reliving the same month or so over and over and over again, as just awful things keep happening. And people will start doing horrible murders. People will go missing. People who seem to have been totally stable become insane. And in each iteration, each time that the month resets itself, you play out a different possibility. And so you see all of these different possibilities, all these different timelines, and you get to see what becomes of these characters. What are the different choices that they could make, and where would those choices take them down? And you think that there's only so much that you can explore in a month's time, but Higurashi explores basically that concept of unlimited choices means unlimited possibilities. And so you have a never-ending array of timelines where all of these horrible things can happen to these kids. So yeah, that's Higurashi right there. So I kind of like Japanese Christian horror because it's rare and I would say much better written. I don't actually know any Japanese Christian horror. You're going to have to recommend some to me, ISO. TV account. I remember a report at school on a Filipino story of the 12 priests of the devil. I don't know more than that. Yeah, interesting. Excuse me, take another drink of water right there. But yeah, cultural stuff, religious stuff, all of these things are all fair game within a horror story. Again, which kind of lends itself to how flexible horror is. Horror can be all different kinds of things. You just have to be innovative. And that's one of the things with Japanese horror. Japanese horror is great because of how direct it is, how you can follow its rules, what it's going to do. But many times they're so rigidly placed in, well, this is what we know, that Japanese horror sometimes is not quite as innovative as an American horror story might be. And when an American horror story knows what it's doing, that innovation opens up all kinds of possibilities, and you can do all kinds of incredible things. And some examples of that let me first, before I start jumping into some of the popular examples that are currently going on, let's just address this right here. Horror tropes. Building your own grand clock. Now, I want to hear really quick from those of you in the chat, how many of you have ever read The Mask of the Red Death? Because if you haven't, then we're going to have to rectify that, because The Mask of the Red Death is incredible. It's so good. Dorcas Daydream says, Don has some horror elements, but it's still not necessarily a horror anime. Still good for spooky month, though. Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, there's definitely some spooky moments in Don to Don, but it absolutely is more of a humorous adventure battle shonen story with a lot of shoujo elements woven into it than a horror story. I'm Omega's here. Woohoo! Great to see you here. I'm Omega. Yeah, long time no see. Fabio says that he hasn't. He hasn't read The Mask of the Red Death, but I'm Omega has read The Mask of the Red Death. Fantastic. As I said, we might have to rectify this for some people who haven't read it because it's such a good story. But just like with the clock that ticks down to people's death in The Mask of the Red Death, we ourselves are always building clocks when it comes to our stories, because you're selecting the tropes or the gears that you feel will work best to make your working story, much like a clock. So, let's again, and I've brought this up before, but again, let's not disparage the fact that tropes exist. All stories have tropes. It comes down to how we use them. And when it comes to writing a horror story, first thing that you need to do is you really need to focus on what your story is going to be and its characters. Remember, a story lives or dies by its characters. So you're like, this is my plot. These are my characters. Focus on that first. Then as you begin writing, do not be afraid to innovate. As I brought before, nearly every decade, people say that horror has become tired and boring, but then they get surprised. Why is that? Well, because horror is always evolving. Horror is always changing. They're always finding new ways to either flip the trope, to twist the trope, or even coming up sometimes with new tropes in order to make horror feel fresh. And that's lovely. You don't believe me? Well, let's have a look at some of the, if I ask, is it a book? Yeah, it's a book, yes. Yeah, it's a short story from Edgar Allan Poe. Now then, let's have a look at some horror stories that have captivated audiences today. The Amazing Digital Circus. The Amazing Digital Circus is absolutely a horror story, which, with the footage I've got going right here, definitely doesn't make it feel like it is, because you got adventures, you got guns, you got silliness and everything. But if we come back to what the story was at its very beginning and the threads throughout each episode, it is the crisis, the existential crisis that each character is going through. Zubul is right now on screen. Zubul does not feel okay inside their own body. That's a crisis. That's an existential crisis that they just can't easily fix. Jax is dealing with a crisis of trying to make sense of the world that he's in and compensating for it in just some of the worst ways possible. Pomni was absolutely wigging out from losing her connection to her real body, thrown into this other world where just obviously everything is messed up, being completely disassociated and falling into depression and despair. Ragatha deals with the existential crisis of having gone through abuse as a kid, and that abuse has stuck with her and has created this trauma that impedes her in some cases from being genuine and connecting with others and wanting to connect with everyone, because if she doesn't, she feels absolutely wasted and unloved and awful. Kinger going crazy, and that's something he can't stop. Existential crisis right there. Someone, and kind of like drive that point home, someone who is very dear to me in my life just found out recently that they are getting early onset dementia and Alzheimer's, and they're relatively young. And because of that, it's very similar to something like with Kinger, where insanity sets in. And it's not that they're a horrible person, that they did anything to deserve this. It's just going to happen, and there's no stopping it. And so, like, that's Kinger's existential crisis. With Gangle, Gangle's dealing with depression, and depression is not something that is easily dealt with. Anyone who has it, either chronically or it just comes swinging in from time to time, knows that depression is not easy. It's a crisis when you're going through it. So the Amazing Digital Circus, even though it's bright, it's colorful, it gets funny a lot of the times, you got these crazy adventures, at its core, you have all of these characters going through something absolutely traumatic and on a very personal level. Fabio, Edgar Allan Poe, I had to write about him in high school English class, here in Brazil anyway. Man, I'm happy to hear that Edgar Allan Poe is getting love all the way down in Brazil. I also love the way the Amazing Digital Circus uses that anxiety of, oh no, is the program finally going to full break down? We can always feel with any electronic. Yeah, say, we as the audience watching the show as well are kind of put through our own crisis of when is this all just going to go to hell in a handbasket? We then have Knights of Guinevere. Knights of Guinevere is absolutely a horror story. It's a horror story born out of Dana Terrace's own experiences working with Disney. It is a psychological horror, at least it's been billed to us as such. The first episode doesn't quite deliver the psychological horror except through Frankie, because Frankie's going insane. It's hard to know if what Frankie's dealing with is actually really happening or not. And we do have to question what's happening with Guinevere, because we're given an unreliable glimpse into either her thinking or the way that Frankie sees her. So I guess in that sense, it is living up to its psychological horror in that it's playing with our minds. We don't know what's real and what isn't, but it's absolutely a horror story reflecting the actual literal state of creatively bankrupt and destroyed Disney, and of the world that many creators find themselves in, where things are just falling apart, where the life and the love have been pulled out. And yeah, certain cities are also just really nasty to go into at times. And sorry, that's just the way that it is. Or certain segments, pollution is a real thing. Anyone who says that it isn't a big problem, I will take you to certain cities and you will learn firsthand what it's like. Or even out into the countryside. There's some areas where you're just like, wow, how did it get this bad? So the Knights of Guinevere does handle some real world horror as well as some elements of psychological horror. And it feels fresh and new to a certain extent because, I mean, how many of us have seen a horror story that so blatantly went to town on Disney and created a dystopia around Walt Disney's vision, his dream, which Walt Disney's original dream is a beautiful thing, birthing an amazing legacy and an amazing company for decades. And Knights of Guinevere is like, yes, but what happens when you follow that to its disgusting end? Yikes. We then have Murder Drones. And Murder Drones effectively took Lovecraftian horror, put it into space, and made it quote-unquote kid-friendly. It's not really kid-friendly, it's a more mature story, but made it friendlier by using robots instead of humans to then go through all of these horrible things. And it is a Lovecraftian story really at its heart, because by the end, if you've been paying attention, you are left wondering if the heroes even survived or really won. There's different ways that you can take the ending, and you can either convince yourself that it's all fine, or if you've been paying attention to the Lovecraftian elements, you realize you're dealing with some weird cosmic entity. It's not going to be that easy to survive. And while it is primarily more adventurous and humorous than I'm squirming in my seat scared kind of a story, by the end, again, if you've been paying attention, you realize what has made the story actually spooky. And that's what makes it feel fresh, because it is this funny, goofy adventure story of robots where shipping comes into play and everything. But then you get some really, really excellent episodes that pay homage to previous, and each episode does pay homage to either a specific subgenre of horror or to a very classic horror story, like The Promenade, tipping a hat to I had the name, the one in my head. Why on earth is it? Why is it suddenly fled? Where they dump blood on the girl. She then goes ballistic, uses her powers and burns everyone. Carrie, there it is, Carrie. So the Promenade is a nod to Carrie. Episode 2 is a nod to The Thing. episode 4 is a nod to all of our great teenage adventures in the woods and all the awful things that happened to them. Oh my gosh. And the first episode evokes a lot of the old classic vampire stories. Yes, TV count Carrie. You got it right as well. If I says still, I'm surprised to remember that there are people who talk about acidic polluted rain as if it were solved for good years ago. Yeah. Am I free to put my take on the end here, or are we just describing the stuff like this without many details? Oh, I'm just kind of jumping on through, talking about how each one of these stories ends up being what feels like a fresh take on horror because of the innovation that each creator brought to it. And then we have the Gaslight District. The Gaslight District doesn't come across immediately as a horror story, just more as a very unsettling, unnerving story because everyone's just in a very hellish situation. But that is ultimately the horror. Excuse me, that you have these characters who are living in what was supposed to be a utopia because everyone could cheat death. But by the end of the day, it actually is a horror story because they can't cheat death. I mean, they've cheated death. Then by cheating death, they've lost humanity. They've become something else. And as you pay attention, you realize that none of them actually enjoy this particular life. People are living it. People are living in this weird sense of debauchery, but they're not actually enjoying themselves. That immortality, he is only just staving off the eventual hell awaiting all of them, which is why none of them want to die. It's why they're so terrified of the human coming in. And so you get this really, really neat take on dystopia. It's the more I've thought about the Gaslight District, the more I've seen a kind of spiritual similarity. And when I say spiritual, I'm not talking about religious, but more like in terms of what's really happening at its core. There's a kind of spiritual similarity between the Gaslight District and the Scythe trilogy, which is all about people trying to escape death. And how death, no matter what, even when you think that either through magic, through curses, or through technology, death will always find a way to come and get you in the end. And for a lot of people, that's something that is absolutely horrifying. And to everyone who's like, well, I wish I could just cheat it, a story like the Gaslight District is there to tell you, you really don't want to cheat that. Because if you do, this is the kind of world that you create, and these are the kinds of monsters that you make. And in a world without humanity, that's the Gaslight District. And I find that to be very compelling, which is why, even though I know a lot of other people are not necessarily all that interested in the Gaslight District, and the numbers kind of back that assessment up, I still find it really interesting because it's got some great characters. It's got a great premise. I like the creepy Inferno-esque world that's been created and the dystopia that's been made by people having cheated death. Okay, because I tend to be very direct about this stuff. So if you want no Murder Drone spoilers in chat, I won't put it here. Well, Fabio, I think that almost everyone here right now in the chat, as far as I know, has actually watched Murder Drones. And by this time, it's been out long enough. I know that there are some new people who come across it, and I think those are the people who've been brought in thanks to something like Knights of Guinevere, the people who've defected from Disney and didn't realize that indie animation was actually a viable option. But those people have already discovered Murder Drones because Murder Drones has actually been going up by millions of views recently, last I checked. So, Murder Drones still highly relevant, but one that's been around long enough that, and people, I think, especially here, have seen it, that if you wish to bring up anything in the chat about Murder Drones, you can go on ahead. Say it's not going to, I think, break anyone's heart, because I believe everyone here has already seen it. But yeah, so innovation. And we see that innovation happening, especially over at Glitch. Glitch prefers the horror stories, and that's what they've been making and have been succeeding to one degree or another. Again, I think that the numbers really bear out and that people enjoy more the horror provided by the Amazing Digital Circus and by Murder Drones more so than what we've seen so far with Knights of Guinevere or of the Gaslight District. And for anyone who is interested in keeping up with the numbers, last I checked, but we can certainly check again, Knights of Guinevere, I believe... yeah, there we are. It's still only at 12 million. Knights of Guinevere has kind of petered out in terms of pulling in more of an audience. Yeah, at this rate, it might take another week. Just looking at the numbers, it might take them a week more before they reach 13 million, which 13 million is a very respectable number, but that's actually significantly less than the Gaslight District. And that means that everyone who wanted to see it already saw it and enjoyed it and now has moved on, waiting for the next episode to come out, which actually isn't particularly great for Knights of Guinevere because they need more people watching it to really justify again the price tag that was put on this show. And that's something I definitely want to discuss in detail for a later video, not right now here on this live stream. So, with that being said, let us jump back here to our slideshow. So your task, should you choose to do it, is to build a horror story. Start first with a fear. What is something that you fear? Second, decide if your story will speak to a greater societal message or problem. Maybe a personal one, or maybe your horror story will be free of such messaging. Third, craft your characters. Fourth, determine how your characters will live out the fear and message you've selected. Fifth, assemble the tropes that you will need for your story. Again, thinking like kind of building a clock. And lastly, and most obviously, you gotta write it. Now then, to kind of help to illustrate this, and to also toot my own horn and to bring some eyes on over to talk about the Choose Your Own Horror Adventure story, which has been posted up here on our channel for you to check out and to vote on. And I would love it if you did vote, because that will help to move the story along. So let me tell you guys about the horror story that I'm presenting to everyone. The fear that I'm playing around with is, what if you went camping and all of the spooky the spooky stuff that you know isn't actually going to happen on your camping trip happens. And for instance, I am drawing very specifically on an experience from when I was a kid. I went camping with my family up to a place called Big Lake in eastern Arizona. Very, very beautiful place. High up in the White Mountains. It's secluded. You got this beautiful, picturesque lake surrounded by the woods. It's gorgeous. It's a really, really beautiful place to go to. Now then, one year when we went camping, there was this idiot woman who wanted to get a bear to come over to her camper. So what did she do? She cut up a bunch of watermelons and placed the watermelons out in a specific trail to coax the bears to her camper. The bear came. The bear did not go to her camper, though. It went to the tent a couple spaces over and proceeded to smash in the tent while the people that were sleeping there found themselves suddenly getting trampled on by a bear. So I was like, what if you took the bear attack and something spooky happening out there in the woods, and you combined it together? Now then, there's a little bit more going on. I'm not going to say it because otherwise I would spoil the adventures that are coming down the road, but that is the inspiration for this year's Choose Your Own Horror Adventure story. What exactly is the message? Again, I can't say because I might spoil certain revelations that will come along the way, but the characters. I decided to actually go with a larger cast of characters. I was thinking I might do only 4, but I was like, you know what? No. I'm going to do a larger cast of characters. I'm going to have 2 couples, and I'm going to have 2 kids that one couple wants to get together, and the other couple's trying to not get together. Why is that? Well, because the one dude, Pete is just looking for a rebound. He wants a rebound. He's not looking for a committed relationship. The couple that's trying to get Pete together with the single girl, Julie, they're all like, yes, it'll all work together, because Julie's going through some stuff right now. Julie needs a boyfriend. If she has a boyfriend, her life is just going to get better. It's a horrible way of thinking. Just because you're in a relationship does not make your life magically better. It's not the way things work. So Josh and his girlfriend Sarah is an absolute city girl. She's never gone camping before. Josh has gone camping, but he's also kind of a city boy, so they're kind of out of their element. They're here for the kissy makeout and to try to get Pete together with the to get together with the band girl Julie. Meanwhile, you've got Rosie and Jose. Jose is planning to join the Marines when he graduates at the end of the school year. Rosie is his junior girlfriend, who is a cowgirl. So they're both outdoorsy. They both know about this place, Marines Lake, where they're going to go camping. And they're like, this is a great place to go. And they're being friends. They're taking friends out to a great place to go and camp out and just enjoy a particularly long weekend. Yay. Julie doesn't really want to be camping, but her parents have sent her camping because they're like, you need to get out of the house and the situation that right now is going on. And Rosie and Jose want to help Julie out. Everyone kind of wants to help out Julie, though Pete wants to really more help himself out. So there you have it. There are our 6 main teenage characters. It's simple. I mean, because I'm not going very in depth. This is ultimately going to be more of a novella in terms of its length. So I don't have the ability to go in very deep unless I was going to write this as a novel, and I could then give you even more and more about these characters. But that's enough that you need to know right now to kind of get the story going. Now then, 4th, determine how your characters will live out the fear of the message that you've selected. They go camping, and then shenanigans ensue. And the choices that have already been made for the very first installment put us really quickly into the horror. I actually thought that I was going to have like a day or 2 more, 1 or 2 more installments before we dove into the spookiness. Nope, we jumped right into the spookiness thanks to the choices that were made. And then, okay, so what are my tropes for this story? I can't reveal all my tropes because, again, that might give away some of the things I've got planned for later on. But thinking of American Horror Stories, we've got the purity test. We've got Pete, who's looking for a rebound. He's not a very pure boy, which means he's at risk. Julie, the troubled girl, she must keep her purity, be safe from Pete. Or will people make the choices that will allow for Pete to get close to Julie? We shall see, because if he does, there could be dire consequences if we go by the tropes. So we've got purity versus impurity. We've got teens in the woods, teens being dumb in the woods, technology being ripped away from them because they're so deep into the wilderness. There's no connection, so cell phones can only do so much for you in that situation. And so that means that they are stranded, more or less. There will be some characters that they will meet along the way who know more than what they are letting on. And of course, we have a monster. And the monster does have rules that it is abiding by. It has a story that it is abiding by. So those are the things that I am bringing into this as I then write my story. So let's actually take a moment and actually have a look at this story. And I want you guys to actually critique and rate how the story is going so far. I want your guys' feedback. I want to see if you guys can take what you said, what you got out of this lesson, either what I said or your own observations, and apply it to the story. And let's start breaking down. Let's start critiquing it. Let's see what you guys can learn. What can I learn? What can I improve on? What have I got just right? Now, let me quickly catch up with the stuff right here. So Fabio said a lot. I took it as Uzi being in the process of dying, but since she herself had to become Eldritch 2 to beat the horror, her mind has been saved somewhere, like the Sin hologram flicker at the end. You and I are thinking along the same lines, Fabio. So Uzi's in a similar place that Sin was before, banishing herself to that while joined by Sin to beat Sin. Gaslight District stuff reminds me of a dilemma. It's culturally accepted that, in seemingly random times, a dragon will kill someone. Sometime a way to kill said dragon is finally found, but should we? It's all about what if we do find a way not to die of old age, but should we really go through with it? Should we really? Yes, I really like that line of thinking, Fabio. So maybe the real monsters, the friends we made along the way. That is very true. Start with a fear of mine. What came to mind was to go for a looming fear I've gained with time, to make something related to how good people, including me, who could maybe help solve so many bad things and all around in the world. ... All right. So let me pull up the story as we so far have it. This will take just a brief moment as I got to go on over into posts, and then we'll get to share my screen. Posts. Alrighty. Ooh, very, very interesting. Okay. Let me now share my screen. Shall share the screen. Do the entire screen. Audio. All right, there we go. And there's the eternal swirl. All right. So I'm going to read through the story. And again, using what you guys have learned from this lesson, let's start doing a little bit of critiquing here. So, Maureen's Lake is a beautiful location high in the mountains, surrounded by thick green forests and beautiful fields full of flowers. Pleasantly warm during the day, it's always cool during the night. The night sky is brighter than you can imagine there. When storms rip through, the weather turns violent, but the scenery remains stunning. So for all people looking to escape the pressures, the hustle and bustles, the noise and anxiety of the modern world, Maureen's Lake is the place for you. 6 teenagers made their way up for a long weekend to the lake. Josh and Sarah more or less led the charge, saying that everyone needed to make the most of fall break. The first 2 months of the new school year had been rough, especially for Julie, who was dealing with more than just band practice and surviving chemistry. Jose suggested the lake, saying it was one of the nicest and calmest places he had ever gone to. And so, in a caravan of 2 trucks, packed way too full of bodies and camping equipment, the 6 friends climbed the state highway up to the woods. Oh wow, it's so green! Everything smells so fresh and feels so cool! Sarah shouted, sticking herself out of the passenger side window. Girl, get back in here before a tree takes off your head. Josh laughed. He checked his phone and saw that they had lost reception already. Thanks to downloading the map, he figured it was easy to reach Maureen's Lake, but they were well and good out of the city now. Glancing in the rearview mirror, he asked his buddy Pete, "How are the legs doing back there? You've been scrunched up for ages." "It's all good. Just wondering, though." "About what?" Josh asked, his gut sinking a little. "I don't think Julie really likes me." "Dude, it's the start of the trip. Just give her some time. Be your most charming self," Josh encouraged, although he knew it was a tall ask. Pete went through girlfriends like a runner went through socks. But he liked the guy and he wanted him to get over his latest heartbreak. Plus, a fun distraction for Julie could be what the doctor ordered. Sarah reeled herself back into the car and promised Pete that she would do everything in her power to make sure that he and Julie had some alone time on the trip. Alone in the woods? All kinds of magic could happen. Meanwhile, in the other truck, Jose complained. "Josh is driving too slow. It'll be almost too dark to see when we set up. I knew we should have taken the lead." "You can pass him," Rosie pointed out. "Yeah, but then I'm crossing the double line. There's always a cop nearby whenever I try anything even slightly illegal. Should have let me drive then, Rosie said, pouting over the fact that he hadn't given her the wheel. At least she got the radio rights. How are you holding up, Jules? You've been quiet this whole time. Julie was staring at her phone. She had just lost reception, but there was still no word from Mom. It made her feel sick. Perhaps she shouldn't have come on this trip. Both of her parents and all her friends said it would be good to get some fresh air that wasn't out on the football field, but Julie couldn't shake a growing sense of foreboding. Struggling to find her voice after so long of not using it, she croaked, "You cannot leave me alone with Pete. That guy was undressing you with his eyes and it was just ick. Why did Josh even invite him along? Because Josh is a good-hearted friend who has no experience with dating outside of Sarah and doesn't realize that Pete is bad news," Jose said flatly. "Don't worry, though. We'll stick close to you. And if he tries anything," Rosie said, happily cracking her knuckles, "they don't find bodies out of Marine's Lake." "What do you mean?" Julie asked her. Jose rolled his eyes. "Not with the story again." "Well, I should save the details for when we get to share ghost stories." "Please don't," Julie pleaded, but Rosie ignored her. "It was a woman whose daughter got taken by a bear. She hunted the bear down for a week, finding only scraps of her daughter's clothes. Some eyewitnesses saw her finally confront the bear on the shore. She shot in the face, but the bear charged her, bit off her head, and they both vanished into the lake. None of the bodies were ever found." "It's an old, dumb story," Jose assured Julie. "I've been camping up there loads of times and never ran into any ghosts or bears. There are some bears in the area, but if you pack your food just right, they have no reason to come close. And there's rangers who oversee the campgrounds we're using. They'll keep us safe." That was a little comforting to hear. Julie just wanted to try and relax on this trip, anything to give her mind a sense of ease. Unfortunately, it wasn't working. She nervously glanced down at her phone, praying for a sudden burst of connection. When the two trucks finally pulled through the little ranger gate and onto the loop that surrounded the campsite, Josh and Jose parked as close to the lake as possible. True to Jose's words and worries, the sun had already dipped down below the horizon. A chilled wind rushed up from the lake, and the first stars were already appearing. Sarah darted towards the lake, shouting, "This is a picture-perfect moment! Come on, everyone! We need to do this now, before the light changes!" "No, what we need to do is set up camp," Rosie protested. "What about taking a look around? Getting used to the place?" Pete suggested. So that was the first part of the story, and then here is the rest, where you can vote. Sarah got her way. With enough pestering, even mountains would bow to her will and whims. The 16s hurried over to a low, wide rope fence and down the rocky shore right up to the water's edge. Sarah spun them all around and took a wide selfie of the whole group. Her photo captured the tranquil lake and darkened woods on the other side, bathed in the purples and pinks of twilight. True to everyone's separate fears, this was the last moment to take the photo. The light immediately dropped as the autumn night sped on. The temperature rapidly dropped and the teens were forced to use the flashlights on their phones to avoid tripping over the fence on their way back to the trucks. "I hate setting up at night," Jose complained. "It's so easy to lose things in the dark, and then you don't find them again until you're packing up to leave." "Which is why I came prepared by barely packing anything," Pete said, puffing out his chest. "Yeah, you're going to regret that. Did you even bring a heavy jacket?" Jose asked. "Nope. Why?" Soon Pete was the guy working the hardest, or better put, he was the one moving around the most. Puffs of white mist escaped their mouths as the boys and girls labored to get everything up. True to Jose's words, it was hard getting their sites set up and managed by phone light and flashlight. At least 3 stakes went missing, along with the main tent's fly. The group had decided on a single tent to house everyone when they slept. It made it easier to bug each other during the night and share body heat. The girls did have a separate, much smaller tent set aside that was meant specifically for changing and hiding away things they didn't want the boys to see. Rosie made certain that all their food and smelly deodorants were all packed safely in the trucks. Jose got his portable gas stove set and began prepping tacos for the evening meal. Pete asked Julie if she would help go find the pump and get water. Rosie stuck to them like glue, much to the guy's annoyance. Sarah tried to intervene and ended up joining the group as well. Pete was forced to carry the bucket. The brilliant night sky shone down on the group as they ate Jose's amazing tacos. around 2 lanterns. They were soon joined by an invading army of moths and other little bugs, having their last adventure before the season's growing cold forced them underground. Being a total city girl, Sarah complained about the critters and soon retired to the changing tent. "Hey, Julie, want to go check out the ranger's cabin?" Pete asked her. Jose stretched his arms, warming himself up after sitting and eating for a bit. No, Jose, Josh, not Jose. Josh stretched his arms. "Man, Jose, I didn't know you could cook so well. I'd eat only those tacos for a week. You might be singing a different tune after later tonight," Jose joked, making a fart noise. "Beware the beans," Rosie snickered. "We should start figuring out what we want to do tomorrow. There's a really lovely hike just a mile." "Eek!" Sarah screamed. Josh immediately leapt to his feet and tore open the changing tent. Sarah was on the ground staring at her phone. She seemed to have dropped it between her legs. Whiter than a sheet of printing paper, she was ready to faint. When her boyfriend asked what was the matter, she pointed shakily at her phone. Curious, Josh picked it up. Julie felt a horribly cold sensation in the pit of her stomach when she watched his eyebrows shoot up. "What is it?" she asked, dreading an answer. "Is this real?" Josh asked Sarah, showing her the screen. She refused to look at it, but nodded jerkily. "And maybe he used a bad filter by accident because... Wow! Come, guys, have a look!" The other teens ringed the tent's door, where Josh held out Sarah's phone and showed what had frightened her. She had been looking at the picture they had taken and discovered that in the water just behind them was a hulking, waterlogged bear. Its face was all torn up and bloody. The one eye they could make out was milky white. Jose chuckled nervously and said that had to be a bad prank because this thing was obviously not there when they took the group photo. This prompted a furious discussion. Everyone scoured Sarah's phone for the creepy app that corrupted her picture. They had no such luck. When they finally went to bed that night, with Pete sleeping on the ground because he hadn't brought a cot, rest didn't come easily to any of the friends. The night was abnormally silent. Nervous gazes, covered in the darkness, kept sliding to the thin fabric wall, separating them from the too close lake. Just what if that beast was real? Then, very early that morning, dogs began barking in the distance. They sounded frantic. Julie woke up and held her breath. They couldn't be barking because they smelled something nearby, right? Just as she told herself that it was just dumb dogs being dumb, a heavy thumping past the tents. Tears welled up in her eyes. What if the monster bear was real? Or what if this was something far worse? However, the rhythmic sound faded, though the dogs kept braying and howling. Julie didn't feel like leaving the tent when the sun rose. What if they found tracks that confirmed the presence of a monster? What if it was waiting for them outside? What if nothing was there and she was just losing her mind? Every possibility was horrible. "Well, that was the worst sleep of my life," Josh finally announced. He rolled out of his cot and exited the tent, letting in a stiff breeze and the morning chill. As he exited, he said in a loud, surprised tone, "Hello there, Ranger. What's going on?" "Oh, we had an incident last night," the gruff voice from an unseen adult answered. "Don't worry. No one was hurt, thank goodness. But we want all campers on site to come to the Ranger cabin today and have a chat. Need to make sure everyone follows the rules so we have a safe and pleasant time out here at Marines Lake." Thank you, sir." "Rick, you may call me Rick. Ranger Rick. I'll talk with my friends and make some time to come down and see you." As the teens woke up one by one, Rosie started a breakfast of hash browns and sausage. Josh told them about his brief encounter, and he stressed that it might be good to go and check in at the cabin and find out what was going on. Julie wanted to leave, but she found herself unable to voice her desire as Pete cut in and insisted that they check out this hiking trail Rosie had started telling them about the day before. Everything last night had turned out well in the end, so why waste any more time of their vacation? At the same time, Rosie suggested that they walk the whole campsite and find out for themselves what Ranger Rick was so upset about. So, this is where your votes come in. What should the 6 friends do? Go to the Ranger's cabin and find out what happened? Go hiking and forget all the spooky stuff? Or search the whole campsite for signs of trouble? As you can see right now, the first option is winning, but is that necessarily the right choice to make? For you guys to decide. Now then, coming back on over here, I want to hear what your guys' thoughts are about this story, breaking it down. ISO, did you mention where they were camping, like the state? I did not. In the back of my mind, this is the state of Arizona, but honestly, anywhere where there are mountains and secluded lakes, you could put that in almost any place. So it's kind of meant to be open, where anyone could kind of envision themselves going camping there. But that's an excellent question. Yeah, no, I didn't state the exact state. In the back of my mind, I picture Big Lake from Arizona, but I did not state that was the place, obviously, because it's Marines Lake. Let's see here. Fabio's. Let's see here. Catching up with what you had said before, bringing it all together to make something related to how good people, including me, who could maybe help solve so many bad things all around the world, but they didn't want to. Everyone just wants normal life, not to have to do something big to maintain it. Well, ain't that just lazy? Did my final part get sent to you? Doesn't disappear, so if it wasn't delayed, maybe is in the all messages option. I don't know. I got what I have right here. Imagining this as a weird fusion of something else in Disney's Braveheart style. Mordu was an amazing monster, though. Oh yes, Mordu was. Man, the bear is really making me imagine a worse version of that tattered wild bear in Brave. Ah, excellent. Yes. Imagine a very disgusting, mangy, waterlogged bear with like half of its face blown off by a shotgun. That's what this thing is like. You see that's when you do this wonderful survival tactic called nope. Say obviously kind of at this point you'd be all like, oh, most normal people would up and leave. Though in all honesty, kind of putting myself into the situation, I might actually stick around for one more night just to see what would happen. Like, we got guns. We stay another night and find out what happens. Or maybe go down to the Rangers and start asking some real questions, and based on the answers that we get, make the decision to either nope out of there or stay, all depending. But yeah, so the choice is up to you. The choice is up to you guys to decide where the story goes next. Stardrop Mellow. Oof. Now, Fabio, I didn't read aloud everything just now what came before, but I did read before what you were saying about the starting with the fear in mind. And yeah, I got that stuff, so I wouldn't want to stick around, but like clearly the bear could find you in a hike out. Maybe the bear's just around the lake, because that's where the bear vanished, according to the crazy story that Rosie said. Like, even if you didn't believe the legend, why would you sleep near a rotting bear corpse? It attracts other predators. It smells awful. True. If there is a corpse around, why would you want to be anywhere near that? But again, none of them saw or smelled anything when they took the picture. The bear just appeared in the picture. What went padding by that night and what made all of the dogs freak out? Could that have been the bear? Or was it something else? Is Julie losing her mind? Don't know. We don't know. The funny thing is this. So coming back actually to that same story that I said about my real experience of going camping up at Big Lake and that dumb lady putting out watermelon to attract bears. When that went down, let's hear. That was one camping trip, and then on another time that we went camping up at Big Lake. So after the whole bear attack, my family took it very seriously. Bears are up here. Be respectful of the bears. And so my mom the next year was all like, hey, so she was talking talking with our camping neighbors, and she wanted to make sure that everyone was clear not to leave out food. Don't do anything to attract the bears. Well, one guy was all like, oh, don't you worry. I got my dogs here. My dogs will bark up a storm if a bear comes close. Don't you worry nothing. Well, that night, the dogs did not stop barking. So my mom was like, there's a bear, there's a bear, there's a bear, there's a bear. And we had our campsite next to a boulder. The boulder at night looked a lot like a bear. And so my mom is just seeing this silhouette of a bear and just being like, there's a bear, there's a bear. And the dogs are barking. Oh my gosh, and I've got all my little babies here. What am I going to do? How do I take on a bear? How does mama bear, human mama bear, protect her kids from a real bear? And so she didn't sleep a wink that night. She was so scared. In the daytime, came on out, it's a boulder. There were no bears. It was just the dumb dogs being dumb. So, again, real life camping experience right there is kind of what inspired those two opening segments to the story. So the bear could be there. The bear could be a fake. It could all be in their heads. We'll find out depending on the choices that you guys make. It would be funny if you did a misdirection with a normally big bear, a living bear, that they find and dismiss it only for the corpse bear to appear later. Oh, ISO, you are giving me dangerous ideas. Fabio, well, seems all options could potentially lead to a bad ending. There's the fun. Exactly. I mean, it's a horror story. And so all kinds of awful things you would expect to have happen. We'll just see. We'll just see where the story goes from here. Again, I do need your guys' votes to determine what will happen. Because I'm not going to give away how the story might change depending on the choices. But this is going to be a good one. I always enjoy doing these choose your own horror adventure stories. I've been doing them now, let's see here, for over a decade. I started doing them towards the end of my undergrad in college. And I just kind of did them just for the fun of it. I didn't know if anyone was really going to get involved. But over time, people started coming to expect that I would just do these. And I'd only been doing them over on Facebook for family and friends. And only recently I'm like, you know what, let's translate this over. So I started doing it while I was a teacher, and I've been enjoying doing it now. But TV account, I still suggest that your cat needs therapy for her stress eating. Oh, my cat Honey. Yeah, we do our best to help Honey not eat so much. Oh boy, that poor cat. So the hike seems to be that nope option. Yes. Yeah, that camping. Not camping. Why I say camping? Because it's a camping story. Yeah, that hiking. I myself, if I knew that there was an undead bear about, hiking would be literally one of the last things I do. Kind of goes to show how dumb Pete is. Not coming prepared for the camping trip. Everything he does is trying to make those moves on Julie. So yeah, maybe make a decision that gets Pete killed. I just gave my vote, and it was definitely not go hiking. Wink. I remember back in summer school, I went on a field trip to our city's museum, which had a planetarium, which scared the crap out of me. It took me years to get used to it. Nowadays, it was a while, but it was a while to admit since I went to one. Well, wow, I would love it. I mean, I'm now very interested, I'm Omega, in what was going on at that planetarium, because I've always enjoyed planetariums. I think that they're really cool, very beautiful. I've never considered one to be scary, but You know what? That's a very interesting idea. What is it that makes a planetarium scary? So yeah, I'm interested now. You're gonna have to tell me. Now look at me, just barely outrunning all those little guys. Woo! Or is it that option one? You would be obligated to make the worst possible choice in every sense of the word. Just straight up kill one of the characters as a consequence of our stupidity. Oh. I've got stuff planned depending on the choices. Depending on the choices that are made within the story. Again, I'm not giving away what's all going on, but I'll just say that there's things happening at this campsite. Oh yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people do learn about the characters, what's all going on. But that's all based on the choices that'll be made by everyone playing, which is always fun to do with these choose your own horror adventure stories. And actually, one of the things that I would suggest when it comes to, like, if anyone wants to even try out something like this, is that you come up with your story. Like, you come up with, okay, so here's our characters, this is the kind of the basic plot of what I would like to see happen, even based on what other choices could be made by the characters. The plot is moving forward. Like, the plot is that force that carries the story from point A to point Z, and the characters' choices can influence how the plot gets from A to Z. That's what allows you to then have that quality of character autonomy without sacrificing the overall story. So you actually get to learn how to balance some really important stuff when it comes to your stories by doing this. But also, it helps you to be forced, based on other people's choices, to not get as in depth into some things as you would like to be. Because as writers, like, we all know that your story, your lore and everything is a whole lot like an iceberg. There's only ever 10% that is seen by everyone, and then 90% is all just stuff that's kept to you. But we as authors are always so determined to get as much of that other 90% on the page or on the screen as possible. And doing a choose your own horror adventure story, when done well, actually prevents you from getting as much onto the page as you would like, because of the choices that some people make. And because you can't do certain revelations or certain info dumps in certain places of your story, because it just wouldn't work that way. And so a choose your own adventure, or choose your own horror story in this instance, is actually a great way of practicing restraint as an author of what you can and can't share depending on character choices. And so it's a very, very fun exercise. It is different from writing any normal story, but it is one that I would encourage if you want to tackle that particular exercise and really stretch yourself. Make says, try imagining the rest of your days, something just coming out of the sky all of a sudden, or pictures just showing up where it shouldn't be. Oh, now that's interesting. Okay, I got you, Omega. Now then, again, I want to hear from you guys, because you guys have talked a little bit about the story, which I love. But what do you guys think of the horror story so far? Granted, we're not very far in, but do you feel like I was able to pull on some of those important elements that I said that you needed? So, like, for instance, if I jump back on over to here to what we need, I've told you guys the fear. So we got some fear. Do we feel at least that, like, one fear, even if you're not exactly sure which fear it is, has already kind of been addressed? You might not, like, again, we're really early in, so the whole message thing, you won't get it because I haven't even begun within the story to really set it up. However, there might be some messages that you can already take away. Like if I maybe might be in your shoes, I can already think of maybe one or two that immediately come to mind where I'm like, ah, yes, yes, Lars is making a point here. I can see it. Do you think I've been properly setting up my characters? Do my characters feel at least individuals, like individuals? Even though I know I did not actually describe any of them directly to you, even without the description of saying so and so looks like this, so and so looks like that, do my characters at least feel somewhat individualistic, or have I absolutely failed on that front? And obviously, fourth, you guys will see that as we go throughout the story. So, yeah, we're kind of, again, we're only looking at some pieces right here, but do you guys see some of those recognizable pieces? That's what I want to know. All right, so the characters go to the ranger's cabin and somehow learn that the bear is the ranger's reincarnated son. Oh my gosh, that'd be awful. To this day, staring up to a cloudless sky gives me the heebie-jeebies. You know, I'm Omega. I can actually empathize with that. There are times where if I'm just looking up at an empty blue sky, if I think too much about it, I feel like I'm about to fall upwards. ISO, why? Who wouldn't be scared of being stalked by a dead bear corpse? You know what? There are some weirdos who would say that they aren't, but yes, I think everyone would be scared if they knew that there was a dead bear corpse, an undead bear that was following after them. So yeah, so we definitely have our fear. We've got a fear of a bear corpse that somehow ended up on this girl's phone, on Sarah's phone. That's just really, really weird. And then Julie experiences just that unnerving thing at night where the dogs are barking. There's that heavy thumping that passes by. Could be a bear. Is it? If it is it the undead bear? Fabio, that didn't happen with it like that. But my thoughts went to the Mandela catalogs vibes in a scene like you look up at the sky, see the face of God. Wait, is that God? That'd be something. That'd be something to go through. But yeah. So let's see here. We got it. Let's see here. We've been chatting now for just over 2 hours. I got a busy day tomorrow, so I'm right now weighing my options for continuing this. Let me quickly check something here. Looking up Mask of the Red Death. Story by Edgar Allan Poe. Let's see here. Okay, so you can read the whole story here online. So this kind of begs a question right here, because the Mask of the Red Death is just so good. Do we want to round things off? Do we want to round things off tonight with a reading of the Mask of the Red Death, or should we call it good right there? Because either I say, okay, I kind of done all of my talking, what I had planned, so I'm good to call it quits, or do we want to introduce Fabio to the Mask of the Red Death? And if you have read it before, for anyone else, do you want to relive it? Do you want to hear my scratchy voice reading it out? Fabio, also your characters were very convincing to me. Well, thank you. Their individualities seemed like they were shining through. Well, thank you so much. I'm glad that I got that. I am glad that I got that. Fabio says a reading, that'd be cool. Isa says I won't complain. All right. See if anyone else has got anything to say real quick. And also then gives me a chance to, again, take a drink of water. As hydration important. Alrighty. Well then, allow me again to, I'll share my screen. Yes, we shall share the entire screen. Sure. All right. And we'll pop on over to the Mask of the Red Death. So I love this creepy picture right here. So there's the clock for the Red Death. The Red Death has long devastated the country. No pestilence has ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the faces of the victim, were the pest ban. There we are. Pest ban, which shut him down from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. So, put into normal speak, if you get this thing, you're dead within half an hour, and it is excruciatingly painful. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. The wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair from without or of frenzy from within. Basically meaning this guy, Prince Prospero, sealed himself and all of his healthy friends into an abbey, which is basically which this particular abbey, rather than being a simple church, is basically a fortress. They've sealed themselves in. The abbey was amply provisioned with, with such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there were cards, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was towards the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was different. As might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre, the apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but a little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and the left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor, which pursued the windings of the suites. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened, and that at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, so were the castmates, and the fourth was furnished and litten with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violets. The 7th apartment was completely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But In this chamber only, the colors of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of these 7 apartments were there any lamp or candelabrum. Amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers, but in the corridors that followed the suite there stood opposing to each window a heavy tripod, bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass, and so glaringly illumined the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. So, for those of you who need 1800 English boiled on down, because you know what, sometimes these are some big words. This is a vernacular that is not normally of our choosing. So, really succinctly, normally what's being described by Edgar Allan Poe is that in a situation like this, you would have a long hall that would be unimpeded. You'd be able to see everything, all of the fancies, the food, the guests, the decor, but not so for this particular celebration. The hall has been quartered off, or in this case, I guess you'd say, septed off. 7 has been cut into 7 segments, 7 different rooms. Each room decorated to be a certain color and to then have that color projected onto everyone and everything. That these magnificent colored panes, these windows, have been set up with bright bonfires contained within these braziers set up behind each one to cast this light into each room. You might have actually seen this at certain celebrations where people have large fires in these big bowls. So that's basically what they've got going on here. And each room is beautiful and well decorated and colorful until the last one, which is completely black and has red windows that throw the color of bright blood everywhere. And it's so ghastly that no one wants to go into the 7th room. All the other rooms are great, but no one wants to go into the 7th one because it's just so dang creepy. And that's because Prince Prospero is kind of a weird guy. It was in this apartment, the 7th one, also, that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang. And when its minute hand made the circuit of the face, the hour was to be stricken, and there came forth from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis. At each lapse of an hour, the musicians in the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions. And there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedated passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other, the musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, That's purple prose. This right here, this is a purple prose moment. This is not needed at all. This is when you know that Edgar Allan Poe was getting paid by the word. There came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery. His conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt he was not. It was not necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers. Upon occasion, it was this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the costumes of the masqueraders. But sure, they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm. Much of what has been seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which would have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and the dreams writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock, which stands in the hall of the velvets. And then momentarily all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laugh floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture. For the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. Into him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the very near clock of ebony a puffed meal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. Now then, a lot of very flowery words. Again, this does actually go into the realms of purple prose. Edgar Allan Poe was waxing very eloquent when he could have actually have said this. He actually already did say this, and he's just now repeating it just with way more wordiness. But in any case, just to, again, make sense of what we've read right here, because, again, this is 1800 speak, so, again, I don't expect everyone to fully understand what Edgar Allan Poe is saying right here. What he's saying is that Prince Prospero really is kind of weird. Anyone who's not his friend would say he's crazy, but his friends don't call him crazy. Of course they wouldn't. Of course they wouldn't. Prince Prospero was the one who came up with this whole layout. He was very specific about each one of these rooms. Each room has a purpose to it. But not only that, he's the one who chose the costumes for each and every single person. And each one of these costumes represents something that is either really awesome or really grotesque, or is very fanciful or very nightmarish. He wants everything thrown into this crazy cacophony. As the night grows on, everyone keeps getting crazier and drunker and happier, and yet they all avoid the last room. Because something about the last room is so creepy. If you even step foot into it, it's not that you suddenly look haggard and disgusting, but it's almost as if the clock itself speaks in a musical note to you, even worse than its chilling chime, that something bad is about to happen. And that's what we're about to get into. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat fervishly the heat of life, and the revel went whirling on, until at length was sounded the 12th hour upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened. Perhaps the more of the thought crept with more of time into the meditations of the thought among those who reveled, and thus again it happened, perhaps that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before, and the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whispering around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur, expressive at first of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it would be well supposed that no ordinary appearance should have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod. That's a great description right there, because Herod, the whole side note right here, Herod, king of the Jews, the one who was known for trying to murder Jesus in the New Testament, was renowned, was infamous for having basically in the descriptions of some people choked to death on blood as he had the Sanhedrin murdered the night that he died. So the rulers of the Jewish kingdom he had butchered so that way he would not go alone into the afterlife, and that there would be much weeping and wailing in Jerusalem. They weren't going to mourn him. They were certainly going to mourn because so many people were going to die that night. So when he says he had out-Heroded Herod, this figure is grotesque, is awful, is deplorable, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the heart of most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be properly made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny might have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with a scarlet horror. When the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its roar, stalked to and fro among the waltzers. He was seen to be convulsed in the moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the group that stood around him, "who dares thus make a mockery of our woes? Uncase the varlet, that we may know whom we have to hang tomorrow at sunrise from the battlements. Will no one stir at my bidding? Stop him and strip him, I say, of these reddened vestures and sacrilege." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now with deliberate and stately step made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same sullen, measured steps which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of the deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity. There's a word for you, impetuosity, meaning that this guy's not thinking through what he's about to do, to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly round and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell, prostrate in death, the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they had handled with so violently a rudeness, untenanted from any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in their despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and the darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. All right, there we go. So there you guys have it. The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. Started out, Mel said, I read this from English class in middle school way back. I remember reading this in high school. I think I read it, if I remember correctly, my junior year. My English teacher was a really awesome guy. I actually had him again then later on for my senior year. So the rooms represent the 7 deadly sins. I don't know if I actually ever heard that before, but you know what? That kind of makes sense considering how Prospero is trying to escape death. And there's a lot of pride, a lot of envy, a lot of lust, a lot of sloth in a thinking that way. Portuguese normal word for chandelier is like that old one, candelabrum. Oh, cool, candelabro. Cool. Creepypasta MCs counting every millisecond. Edgy was a very purple man. Yes, Edgar Allan Poe definitely liked his purple prose, as we saw in that particular story. That's a good creepy one. That is what Edgar Allan Poe had, a real way of just making stories that just stay with you. They're so creepy. It's so cool. Not sure I caught the whole end. Had to give stuff to my dog with phone in hand at the same time. So basically the ending is that Prince Prospero tries to take off the mask of the mummer, meaning the corpse that's striding through the party. As he does so, as he attempts to do so, he is stricken dead at the threshold of the dark room. Suddenly everyone, thrown into a frenzy, goes and attacks the stranger, and they remove the mask, and there's nothing there. It's just a figure that they can't see. And that's when they suddenly realize we're screwed, and everyone is suddenly stricken with Red Death, and they all die violently and horribly throughout the hall. And it is just, So fantastic, so messed up. And I got a cat meowing at my door. Yes, Daisy? Yeah, so there you have it. A Mask of the Red Death. A great story right there. And if any of you are interested in a fun, well, let's see here. Actually, let's see here. Let me make sure I got the name of the movie right just before I do say, yeah, you guys should absolutely watch this. Edgar Allan Poe murder mystery movie. Nope, that's not it. Ah, yes, The Raven. That's the name of the movie. So if any of you want an interesting movie that where a lot of Poe's stories come to life in an interesting murder mystery way, then I say you should check out The Raven, the movie from 2012. But yeah, Edgar Allan Poe, great, absolutely great author. Also, some people think that Edgar Allan Poe might be the one who's actually really credited with starting up the mystery genre as we know it today because of his work, Murder in the Rue Morgue, which actually set an archetype for Sherlock Holmes. So, other reasons to check out Edgar Allan Poe stories. All right. So that will do it. That'll do it for me tonight. We've gone on for just a little more than 2.5 hours, and this has been fun talking about horror stories, getting a chance to read the beginning to my own. And again, I would love it if you guys participated in this choose your own horror adventure story. It was also fun to go back and reread The Mask of the Red Death. A great short horror story from the genius Edgar Allan Poe, and to talk about the differences between Japanese and American horror stories. And I also love the suggestion that was given a while back towards the beginning of the live stream. I think it was from Silent Dragon, about how you can just, like, for instance, take a movie like The Ring or The Grudge, watch the Japanese version, watch the American version, and then see how they both do things differently and why one might be scarier than the other. So all different kinds of things now for you guys to check out and to try going into Spooky Month. Oh, this is going to be fun. We're going to have some great time with some other lessons coming up about writing horror. But to give you guys a bit of a preview into what's going to be happening throughout this month, this is going to be a very busy month for me. I will not be doing the live stream on Friday next week. The reason for that is because I am going with my family to a haunted corn maze, and it's going to be a great time. Like, sorry guys, I love you all, but family comes first, and I'm going to have a great time doing that. I hope that if there's any haunts you guys can go on, that you can check out your own local haunts during Halloween. So I will have a message in the community post area next week detailing when we'll do the regular live stream. Also, I intend, if I can still make this happen, for next Saturday to do a live stream, not with a lesson, but of a one-shot, a spooky one-shot that I will be doing with some of my friends. So that way you guys can see, for instance, how playing a game like D&D or other variants of role-playing games can actually help you with your own storytelling, what you might be able to learn and to gain from it. Plus, it's just going to be a great spooky time. And I can then talk about one of my other stories that I'm right now working on. Yeah, I'm writing way too much right now. So please make sure that you're paying attention to the posts to get updates for when we'll be doing the different live streams, because I'm not doing a live stream on Halloween. I am going out trick-or-treating. Next Friday, I'm going out to a haunt with my family. And then the week after that, I will not be doing a live stream on Friday because I'm going to be out of town celebrating one of my best friend's birthdays, where we are going to be doing spooky movies in the woods. So we will still have the live stream lessons, just on different days when I have the chance to do them. So unfortunately, yeah, I know that makes things a little bit chaotic. But again, please make sure that you're paying attention to the posts, so that way you are kept up to date for when we'll do that. Omega says, kind of reminds me of a gag I came up with. Oh, you'll have to share that with us. Yeah, it does sound cool. Startup Mellow. There's a lot of I love Spooky Month. A lot of cool stuff always to do, and especially the movie night in the woods. Oh, so good. I've done that for a few years now. I actually fell asleep last year. I was so tired, and I woke up when I snored. Oh, that was embarrassing. Yeah. We'll hope this time. I intend to not fall asleep in the middle of a spooky movie night. Especially out there in the woods. I don't think you want to fall asleep in the middle of the woods while spooky stuff is happening. Just in case there's an undead bear coming after you. You know what? Knowing everything, that story really was like certain sorts of creepypasta. Yeah, Edgar Allan Poe, the original creepypasta poster. I says I'm going to post in the comments. Most excellent. I look forward to reading it. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining me tonight for this writing lesson and for the discussions. And I am looking forward to seeing you guys again in the next video here real soon. So until then, y'all, I hope that you take care of yourselves wherever you're at, that you have a wonderful day, morning, evening, wherever you are. And until next time, tschüss.